friends to the first session on this series. As you really know, COVID pandemic has affected every span of our life, both at home, in the marketplace, civil society, politics, governance, you name it, economy. So ISDG has been discussing this in terms of its policy implications, because the usual public policy analysis framework and the usual governance framework, etc., didn't fit into this rather, unprecedented kind of pandemic. This is not just one disaster; it's a series of disasters which affected every span of all over the world. It's a global disaster. There are not many, even 100 years ago, or even during plague, and the entire world is affected by it. Our travel, the whole system, and paradoxically, it also connected us in new ways. And this is one of the new ways. The Zoom and the online teaching, working from home, it transformed many of our choices, the way we live, the way we work, etc. And as we know that these days mask has become so common and usual, and we all got used to it. So ISDG has been discussing, we were also affected deeply by this. We could not open the office, but once we started functioning from last August, one of the things which we thought was to do this series on the impact of COVID on economy, on livelihood, and on public health systems and governance. So that's how this is. So this is a part of a larger research initiative. This involved collecting, secondary data, developing case studies, and this is the first of the webinar series to get the advice of experts, those who are, deeply concerned about it, thought leaders in different parts of India. So we are very privileged to have today and tomorrow, from 4 to 5:30, it's the discussions and dialogue on the impact of COVID on our economy, an economy in terms of employment, in terms of its, gender economy, in terms of, macroeconomic growth, in terms of joblessness, in terms of, small and medium scale enterprises, you name it. Every sector has been sort of influenced by this. So today we have two very good speakers. Both of them are very well known in their respective area of research work. We were expecting three. Professor Praveen Jha, Professor of Economics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. He was expected to talk today, but today he had some very urgent work came, so he'll be speaking tomorrow. And we have Professor Ritu Dewan, who was teaching economics at the University of Bombay, and also she was the head of the department. She has been a leader in the academia, but also in the civil society and also women's rights movement. So Indian Association of Women Leaders, and she has been a part of the Indian Association of Labor Economics. So we are very, very happy to have Professor Ritu Dewan, who is a practicing economist as well as an activist. And those who are from Kerala know very well Professor Jose Sebastian. Jose Sebastian is a public finance expert. He has worked on Kerala economy for a long time. He was a professor of economics, a professor at the Gulati Institute of Tax, and intervention. So we are very happy to have both of them, and we also have a number of other eminent people who have joined this. So we are not only expecting a presentation, but also a discussion. So we will have three, series. The first one is the impact of, COVID on economy, and that is today and tomorrow. Then we will have the impact of COVID on livelihood and, and how it affects livelihood and, issues of poverty, etc., etc. And the third one is the impact of COVID on our health systems, and particularly public health systems, and how it worked or it didn't work in different parts of India. So this is more of an exploration from experts who have been thinking about it. And definitely we need to have much more data, which we're collecting from the government as well as non-governmental sources. But also we hope to have specific case studies to know how it worked. And we really hope to have a book published in the first quarter of 2022, which will bring together these thought leaders' perspectives, writings. That will also be a reference point in the years to come, because we are living in a historical period of tremendous transitions of economy, politics, and international relations. So hence these are very interesting times, if I may use the word of Eric Hobsbawm. So thank you very much. I would now request Professor Ritu Dewan to share his perspectives and analysis on this issue. Madam, you have around 15-20 minutes, and then you will have a discussion. It will be followed by Professor Jose Sebastian, and he will share his perspective of what's happening in Kerala. Kerala is also a very interesting place to know, but I'm sure Jose also is somebody who is watching the national and international sector very well. So with this, I would request, my very dear friend and colleague, Professor Ritu Dewan, to start the conversation and dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for having this kind of an event. It's something which is so very urgently needed. We've been having several over a period of time, but I think to locate it in the economic context is something which is really very essential. So I'm really glad you're having 2 full days of this. What I'm not glad about is the 15 and 20 minutes, because there's so much to say. But anyway, I will respect the time. And
today, today you will get little more time, because
no, I'm just teasing you. Whatever the time is, one has to keep the time. Yeah. Absolutely, I'm just teasing you. So my issue here, the way I intend to focus on it, that if we have to see where the resolution of the problem lies and where the solution lies, we first have to recognize what the problems are and where they originate and how they have articulated themselves in the ground reality of the majority of the people. Of course, we know that there is no macro data, no national data. You ask for, migrant data, there isn't any. You ask for the number of children who have been orphaned with both parents dying. There's no data which is available at the macro level. So what I've been working on this, of course, for more than a year now. And academically, and of course, I think all of us were involved at the ground level too in setting up migrant camps and looking after them. Now, my focus is of course on the gender issue, which is what I've been asked to talk about. And the first starting point I'd like to say is that it is not the pandemic itself, which is really, of course, it has been a problem in many kinds of ways, but it's the response to the pandemic, or the policy response to the pandemic, which is responsible for the majority of issues. And if the problems are caused by what I call a totally uncaring, uncompassionate, clueless kind of a policy response, then the resolution also rise in many ways, not totally and solely, but in many ways in relation to policy changes and several policies which we need to put forward and put in place and maybe struggle for also very much so. Because I think academics, advocacy and action are all very, very sharply linked. Now, before the pandemic came, we already had a very terrible economic situation and a gender situation, which we all know, one of the lowest growth rates in the history of India, even in the 1990s when there was a so-called crisis. It was much worse than that, slowing down. I'm talking in real terms, of course. Also, the economy still had to recover from a very flawed implementation of GST, which had impacted many, many small businesses already. The pointless policy of demonetization, from which people were still recovering, a huge rise in income inequality, and there's enough data where this is concerned that the top 1% held 4 times the wealth of 3/4 of the citizens of our country. Huge fall in work participation rates, and in India, the female work participation rate is one of the lowest in the entire world, and this is something which has been steadily falling. And please remember, this is all before the pandemic strikes us. India already had the lowest monthly minimum wage in all of South Asia at about 4,200 rupees. There was already, after demonetization and the GST implementation, a huge closure of public provident fund accounts, whether public accounts or even private accounts in many kinds of places. A huge fall already in demand and consumption expenditure. And of course, the famous NSS report, I mean, this is only official data which we have, that more than 3/4 of rural population could not afford a nutritious diet. Also, for the first time in 40 years, we already had a percentage of 4% increase in the proportion of population below the poverty line. And of course, we witnessed a fall in ranking even before the pandemic, and all these rankings have collapsed even further in the last year or so, where there's a global hunger index, the percentage of nourished children, inequality index, gender inequality index, the gender wage gap. India already had one of the highest in the world. I'm not even getting into environment performance and press freedom, etc. But please remember, before the pandemic came, India was already downgraded internationally from a democracy to a flawed democracy. Okay. Now, in this context comes the pandemic. The pandemic comes with the most brutal lockdown in world history, and I don't think we can ever recover from the visuals of millions and millions of our workers, 1/3 of our population walking the streets and what they went through. I think this is something which will shame us and shame the state for a very, very long time to come. GDP fell by 50% in a very cynical situation. Very, very cynical. Profits of the listed companies. I was really quite horrified when I did this, that the profits of the listed manufacturing companies actually rose in the first few months, and they have been continuously rising since the pandemic. The household savings rate, which is extremely important where India is concerned, it had already fallen from about 30% before demonetization, 30% of GDP, and now it's only about 10%, if not less, and a massive increase in inequality at every single level. And amongst this, women and sexual minorities, given their location in a very highly gendered society, are the worst affected in relation to production and reproduction of commodities and services across the gendered work and livelihood continuum which exists in all its avatars, whether productive, economic, extra-economic, reproductive, fiscal, monetary, etc., etc. Like I said, there's no national data, so one depends on whether it's CMIE or Azim Premji or a huge number of studies which have been done by different institutions and different individuals across the board in all the places which are regions which have been affected. And of course, we know that in India, 40% of salaried women lost their jobs, 4 out of every 10 women, and they are 11 times more likely than men to lose their jobs. Now, when I say this comparison between men and women, of course, men, being more of them working, lost many more jobs, all right, received much less wages, but the situation of women is even worse than what the men had gone through. Minimum wages, which were already the lowest in South Asia, fell by 23% to less than 3,000. And that is when they got the wages. And we have enough data to show that about 46% of men were not paid their arrears, the wages which they were due when the lockdown was announced. And about 54% of women did not receive their wages at all. In fact, the situation was so desperate that there are, like I said, several surveys which have been done, and anecdotal, household, telephone surveys with different kinds of methodologies which were used. And the two worst illustrations one is in Gujarat, where women worked for 8 hours a day for 15 rupees. That is all. They were so desperate, and the lack of a total closure of any kind of a relief measure. And sex workers in UP, in Orissa, and in parts of Maharashtra also, where they were charging 7 rupees an encounter. I mean, I cannot think of anything which is much worse, and what a lack of a policy has done to the citizens of our nation. Of course, reverse migration, increased competition of jobs between men and women in rural areas. So Narega became a major support structure, but we know not enough money has been allocated to Narega, even in this last budget. In fact, this last budget was called the never before budget, and I call it the never again budget. Please don't ever have a budget like this. It does not take anybody into account at all. The domestic workers most affected. Now you have this work from home syndrome, which gives rise to various other kinds of problems, which I will come to later. But 85% of domestic workers lost their jobs, and not all of them are getting those jobs back. Forget about not getting their wages, not being allowed to enter into societies and homes, etc., and being treated like pariahs, really, in that sense of the term. But 99% used up their savings. And these are savings which they had not recouped even after the period of demonetization, when they had used whatever which they have. So all of them, very heavy levels of indebtedness across the board for all informal workers. And particularly, I'm saying domestic workers, because that's where a significant amount of work has been done. Education, we know the ASA report is out and various other information is out. And this is where one expected that there would be, for online education, there would be more and more allocation. But instead, you have this new education policy, which does not take the majority of the people into account at all, and particularly women. Because by record, on data, official data, only 11% of girls between the ages of 15 and 18 have access to internet and to a mobile. So which means you're going to have one generation which is absolutely out of any kind of so-called job market or improved job market, etc. Nutrition, 45% of women reported, and this is primarily during the pandemic, the first 8 or 10 months of the pandemic. And now, of course, the NFHS 5 data shows us that even in this period, the level of anemia, the level of undernourishment of children, wasting and stunting of children, all had been increasing from 14, 15 and 16, 17, and it has increased much more during the pandemic. Cereal consumption and pulses consumption fell by 60%. And we know this first to feed and last to eat cultural syndrome which exists in our society, that women ate the least of all, and of course the last of all. Midday meals not given. About 60% of children in India did not get even the dry rations. Of course, ICDS too, but you have certain illustrations. I mean, Kerala is one very, very important illustration of how it managed to continue even at this level. No immunization, increase in infant mortality rate, increase in maternal mortality rate, interrupted antenatal services, unsafe abortions, unplanned pregnancies. And this again, I think only between April and September, the data 2020, what was collected, 26 million couples had unplanned pregnancies. So, this was also, of course, the health focus had to be on COVID, but not at the cost of other diseases. For instance, like TB and even all your reproductive issues which are there. There is also a long list which I have been researching on and which should be published anytime soon. And that is what I have termed as collateral inequalities. That these are offshoots which should have been anticipated when the COVID response policy was being drafted. One, the increase in child labor, increase in dowry in many places. And this is not something new. I mean, every time my work on disaster and gender, anytime there's a disaster situation, there is an increase in dowry and a fall simultaneously in the age at marriage. So the achievement of SDGs, which are there, are no longer time bound. And it seems there's no money to invest in these kinds of issues. That's an aspect I will deal with a little later. Also, what is this very reductionist term called COVID widows and COVID orphans, etc. And 2,000 rupees and 1,000 rupees, these kinds of little pathetic allocations which are being given are just not respectful. And people I've interviewed who have tried to access this, they say the word which they all use is that whatever has been given has not kept our izzat in mind, has not kept our self-respect and the dignity of the individual in mind. There is another huge impact, which in fact now there's a new word which has been coined for this internationally, and this is called the shadow pandemic. That is the increase in domestic violence. And this huge increase in domestic violence, primarily because of work from home, and also, let us not forget, the normalization of violence at the national level. If there is no kind of condemnation of violence, whether it is on lynching or murders or kidnaps or rapes or whatever kind of violence which exists, then that violence becomes internalized and becomes normalized. So domestic violence is something which has become absolutely normalized. And please, let's remember in this the fact that marital rape is still not considered as a crime. In this, you had certain kinds of relief packages, and some allocations which were very shocking, which I studied for the first year of the pandemic, that the utilization of these had actually reduced. So the utilization of allocations which were already given in the pre-pandemic budget for labor, for employment, for law and justice, all of these actually were utilized only up to 20 to 40%, even before the budget, the new budget came. That is the third quarter of the pre-budget of the pre-pandemic budget. Also, what we had is the one state which has the maximum violence, and your NCRB data, which has been released very recently, particularly against women, is the state of Uttar Pradesh. And we know violence of all kinds, but particularly the violence against women. And in this, when I studied that, I was really quite shocked that 74% of the Nirbhaya fund, which itself is very, very pathetic, in UP had not even been utilized for that entire year. So even when there was money available, absolutely nothing was given. I'm not going into details of destitution or even, there's this thing about crowding in prisons and therefore release of prisoners, convicted prisoners. And the first category to be released were convicted rapists. And there are many incidents of how they came out and killed the women who had filed cases against them. There is, and this is something on which very, very little work has been done, and I think we really need to focus on this, is the issue of unpaid work. Now, this is not only work from home, of course, work from home, and there has been some kind of information which has been collected that during the first initial period, there was some amount of increased unpaid work which men had started doing. But after 8 or 9 months of the pandemic, this has come back to the original gender inequality in terms of women doing much, much more unpaid work. Now, this issue of unpaid work, I don't want to reduce to an intra-household issue. It is not a matter between husband and wife and how it allocates. That's one aspect of it. Of course, the power relations within the household, extremely important. No one can deny that. But also the fact that what the policy did or what the policy did not do is to recognize the issue of unpaid work and how huge it was. So therefore, you had a stopping of the gas subsidy. The pandemic came in March last year, and I think 24th or 25th was a lockdown which was declared. And on the 1st of April, all the subsidy to gas cylinders was stopped. Ujjwala, the scheme Ujjwala was stopped. It was only in this budget that it was said that yes, 2 crore more women will get. But the price of cylinder, we know how it has doubled over the last 1.5 years. So your subsidies, which have been removed from clean cooking energy, they have been removed from fuel. And of course, we know how that leads to inflation. And a Reserve Bank response, a monetary response, which does not target inflation at all. And of course, simultaneously in the rural areas, what impacted very strongly was the withdrawal of subsidies on fertilizers and on electricity. This is something which came up in the farmers' protest and something which is extremely important to understand. How much time do I have, John? Anyway, I'll continue for another 5 minutes.
Yeah, please continue. Please continue. Yeah. You have another 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes. Now, there was this series of so-called relief packages which have been put forward, which we are all aware of. Now, there is a whole lot of fudging in the data because part of it was something which was already allocated earlier. Part of it is allocated for 2 years. Part of the allocation is for 5 years. So this kind of a data game, statistical game, became very difficult to analyze the budget. Of course, Malini is there and several other people are there who will be discussing this in greater detail. And you had these relief packages which did not focus on the basis of the economic crisis, which is a demand issue. It focused only on the supply component. So easier credit. But when the MSMEs in particular, which employ, I think about 150 million people in our country, when they themselves are not functioning, then to give credit and not give a moratorium on the loan or on the interest becomes extremely problematic for men and for women, because women own about 20 to 22% of the MSMEs and not on account of the MSMEs in our country. There is also, therefore, one of the major issues, again, in terms of the relief package has been the reduction on public provisioning. So whether it is in terms of transport, whether it is in the terms of increasing the taxes, cesses and tolls, even on the travel kind of component, a basic problem, a huge problem, which came when we were working in the migrant camps and trying to source whatever we could, whether it was dry ration in particular, was the number of card conditionalities and the compulsion of these card conditionalities. In the sense that you had to have an Aadhaar, you had to have a ration card, you had to have residence of proof, you had to have residence of proof of age, etc., etc. And as a result, many, particularly women, were left out of this, because very often the ration card which is there is taken away either by the male migrant or it is left in the village for the parents. So this issue of one Russian, one nation, one Russian card, one nation, it really doesn't work for the simple reason of the economic reality of our country and the extent of migration, whether circular migration or temporary migration, which exists, and nothing which came out so clearly to the fore for us. Even when the schemes were there, the design of the schemes was extremely problematic. I'm just giving an illustration of this one scheme. where it was already there earlier, but it was announced again. And they said from 3 months, April, May, and June of last year, 1,500 rupees would be given to widows, single women, not deserted women, not many other categories of women, but primarily single widows. Or you see, these, why I'm saying this in some detail is because it reflects the whole patriarchal context. Women over 40 who are unmarried, meaning that if you're below 40, you have the potential of getting married and having children, so you can't be single anymore. So these two definitions, and disabled, okay, disability, physically challenged women, they were promised 1,500 rupees for 3 months, 500 rupees a month. Now, we have been trying, of course, there's no one to listen to, but we made representations in Delhi, in the various governments, etc., etc. And we pleaded that please give this 1,500 rupees at one go. Do not make it 500 rupees a month. Because when there is a lockdown, when there is no transport, public transport available, that woman to access 500 rupees has to travel at least 100 kilometers by spending an average of about 130 or 140 rupees to access 500 rupees. So we said, give it at one go. So she spends that time, that effort, that risk which she takes, and the 140 rupees which she will spend on an average. Let her access all of 1,500 and not only of 500. But of course, there's no one to listen. So it's not only the fact that very little was given, but the fact that even the design of what was given was very, very problematic. And as an economist, I'd say totally inefficient. Our requests for universal basic income or cash transfers, etc., of course, never came through on the excuse that there is no money, but which I think several studies have been done, and many of us have done these kinds of studies, that there was enough money. It's not only what was raised through PM CARE, which is a private fund, but also what has been raised from the World Bank, the ADB just 3 days ago, 3,000 billion, I think, or 3,000 crores, which were given. You also had a huge amount of money, which now, and what is going on under the name of COVID, is monetization and privatization. And the huge funds which are being raised for this, and absolutely no account of where it goes. And of course, the famous Central Vista. I mean, I have filed 7 cases, and every time the case against the Central Vista, 65,000 crores. What it means to somebody who's really poor is really something. So, and of course, the fact that fiscal deficit has to be maintained, which is not an issue at all. There's a lot more to say. I will stop here, and I just want to end on this one. Like I said, all of us were working in migrant camps. And I stay in Mumbai and very near the airport. And I was working with the migrant workers and distributing the dry rations or wet rations or whatever it was. And the plane comes from the, lands at the airport. And one worker looks up and says, see, NRI are coming back. Those were the planes in which those Indians who were stuck abroad were being brought back for free. Please remember that. Another woman, and you see her identity, she's a Muslim woman, okay, and a migrant worker, and she tells me, she says, madam, I'm also NRI. And I'm saying, what do you mean? How are you an NRI? And what she said, I think, just describes what is happening. She says, I'm a non-required Indian. And please see the farm laws and the labor codes and the CAA and everything what is happening under the camouflage of COVID in this context of what is happening to our economy. Like I said, a lot more to say, but I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ritu Dewan, for this excellent presentation. Particularly, you have not only given the latest data on the issues of malnutrition, labor retrenchment, and number of indicators. You brought the data, but also, unlike many other economists, you're an activist. You work on the ground with the people in Mumbai, and also that experiential perspective. Thank you very much. So we have now another 10 minutes to sort of questions or clarifications, comments. Professor Ritu Dewan gave a macro perspective first, and then she focused on the impact on women particularly, and from household to the economy, and in terms of nutrition, all the indicators. So we have another 10 minutes. Now it is 4:38, around till 4:50. We have time for discussions. If you have any questions on this particular topic, please ask the question, or if you have any comments, please share the comments. Before you start, please introduce yourself, who is speaking, so that Professor Ritu Dewan also would know who is speaking. So the floor is open. Any questions, any comments? Some of those questions have come in the comment box also. So
yeah, somebody, Gino Sam Jacob.
Yeah. So if you have any, can we start with that? So he said, you said some urban perspective, but definitely I know these migrant workers also, the whole issue of most of the people who are, suffering are people who are in the lowest economic strata, but also there is a caste, connotation to this also. Yeah.
Yes.
Or class. So can you give a perspective on that? Especially since you have noted what's happening in Mumbai and you live in the heart of Mumbai. So you'll be able to give that perspective.
Yeah, and like I said, other work which has also been done, and which of course one is aware of and has reviewed several times. And the question which Ginu has asked are impact indicators for urban areas. Now, no, there are just too many. I really don't know where to start. One, of course, is whether you're migrant or not. Secondly, migrant from where? And these are the migration studies which I've done in Maharashtra to show that in fact 80% of the migrants come from other districts of Maharashtra. So it's not as if everybody is, inter-district, etc., etc. So the origin of migration, the year of migration. Now, again, one important aspect from earlier studies and also from what I did now is that many people were displaced, particularly the homeless, okay, and the pavement dwellers. And I don't know if you know the situation in Mumbai, but several of the major pavements where factories are or where work is, that these pavements are rented out by 8 hours basis. All right. So you rent a pavement for say 8 hours for 20 rupees so that you can have a night's sleep before you move on again to the next pavement. So people who were thrown out in the name of, social distancing, actually that term is terrible. We are already socially distanced. It should be physical distancing. They were taken out from one district of Mumbai. In Bombay, we are 2 districts. Taken out from one district of Mumbai and moved to the next district. Some NGOs and some government institutions and whoever was helping out, and there were many, many, many. So we couldn't fill the vacuum of a irresponsible state. But I think what the civil society did was really quite amazing. And a lot of them were put as migrants, but they're not migrants. They came to Bombay some 30, 40 years ago, and they just were pushed from one district to the other district. So the issue of migration with all its nuances. Second, of course, what is very important and what I've said earlier and what John has added on to is the issue of religion. The issue of caste. The majority of them, of course, were Dalits. A significant number of them were Muslims, very few Christians, because they have a slightly different kind of cultural and economic state in at least this area in Maharashtra. Also, the indicators of age, the indicators of what we try to collect data on is that how many years were you working with the same book, with the same employer, with the same state, what we is known as. And what were your wages? Were your wages paid or not? What are the areas which are there? What is due to you? So these, I mean, these are some. The issue of how many meals can you eat in a day? Before, afterwards, of course, we tried giving. So the number of meals which were eaten, the quantity of the meals, not only the number, but whether you had rice and roti, or you were able to afford only rice, or you were able to afford only one bhakri or one roti to eat at a particular time. Do you have access to health? Were you ill? What were the issues? So it's like, and when I talk about nutrition, it's different levels. It's cold food, old food, so-called vegetables. Is it possible to have vegetables at all? Even a banana, which was so expensive. So it's like I cannot tell you the number of indicators which one has broken up into. There are many more in terms of number of dependents, your remittances, how much you send back, etc., etc. And the most important question is, will you come back after the pandemic is over? And they said, yes, we have no option. We hate it here. We hate what has been done to us. We were sprayed with chemicals and treated like animals, but we have no option. So the lack of an option, and that's why, when we talk about migration being an indicator of development, it's an indicator of poverty also, because it's not voluntary, it's forced, it's compulsion.
Thank you very much. There is one question on migrant workers and there is one hand raised. So first we will give chance to the one who was raised the hand.
Who is that? I can't see.
I think it is the one
I can't make out from here.
No, that I don't see the person now. There was a hand raised. So there is a question in the box
on migration again.
Yeah, on migration.
Details of migrant workers displayed. Now, state-wise, that I can send you the charts of, but this is all what has been collected by non-state sources. So please remember, it can only be indicative, and where the civil society is strong or the institutions are strong, and where they've been able to collect information. The portal, of course, the migration data issue, when we got it raised in the parliament and they said there's no data, some of us went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually had to tell the government that please set up a migrant portal for registration. They took 1 year to design a simple questionnaire, which I think any MA student could do in about half an hour, It's just the registration. And now the registration has started, but it's so problematic. We have now been campaigning for the registration to be done on the migrant portal, but that portal keeps collapsing. And we know what the internet issues are like. I'm just back from Kashmir, and where the internet is stopped every, few hours, a few minutes, etc. And people are not able to register. And the number of migrants in Kashmir are very high, particularly UP and Bihar, and they're very happy to be there. They said, we're not worried about the conflict situation because it doesn't affect us, because the respect and the warmth and the conditions of employment are all implemented. So, if you have to ask for work for 8 hours, you are paid overtime if it is 8 hours. So, migration is a very economic and extra-economic and cultural kind of issue. So state-wise data, I think now from the portal, they might be giving.
So there is one question from Maharana, basically the impact of tribals, communities. If there is any analysis.
Oh, TGs, yes, I have been trying for a long time and I have managed to. Data is very difficult, and but at least in 1 or 2 states, some amount of financial support, maybe one-time support, was given to transgenders. But many lost their jobs, and some who were employed under CSR CSR initiatives, you know, in big companies like Mahindras and Tatas and many, many companies, and were thrown out because they were, you know, all contract. None of them were permanent. They were all thrown out. Many who I interviewed, who were living in what is a very typical, what we call a chawl in Bombay, you know, about 8 people, 10 people sharing one tiny room of 10 by 10, and again using it on our basis. That many of these transgenders who were doing this, you know, 4, 5, 6, 8 of them sharing, they were thrown out because they had no money to pay their rent. They went back to their homes, and where they were locked up, many of them were locked up, subjected to huge physical violence from the family members for coming out openly as transgenders or gay, etc. And also what happened was, you know, that earlier they could access some kind of a moral support or a physical support from organizations working with TGs. They could not do that anymore now. So there's a study in Bangalore, which is extremely interesting on this kind of issue. Maharashtra, there was some kind of money after which was given, but most of the other states, not at all. In fact, the illustration of the sex worker I gave, who was charging 7 to 10 rupees an encounter, was that of a transgender who I know for a very, very long time. So I think they are just treated like criminals even now. You know, their situation is, and sex workers, I think the worst. And all of them are hugely indebted. So it's not as if the problem is going to be resolved. It's a generational problem for all the poor in the country, and particularly for transgenders and sex workers.
Thank you very much, Professor Ritu. Dewan, is there any correlation between pandemic?
I mentioned that. And this is, like I said, not only the pandemic. This is throughout the world. The many studies. Like I said, I've written papers on gender displacement, and I will share them with you, and disaster. And whether it was after the tsunami, whether it was after floods, invariably, and even when it is displacement, particularly of tribals and Adivasis from common property resources, which is what is going on now, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, that for them it is extremely difficult. And this recording has been there, that always the dowry increases in case you don't get a person from the same village or the same community, etc. And the appropriation, because remember, dowry is one form. The second form is through child marriage, which is the appropriation of labor of a girl child into another family. So one has to see it at both levels. There's enough evidence on this. As soon as my paper is published, I will share it with you.
And actually, one of the things in Kerala, Professor Dewan, that question will come. All the data shows, actually, there was an interim report by the Kerala Police on crime against women. Yeah. The data in the first 6 months till May 2021 shows a tremendous increase in the violence against women, number one.
Yes.
And also in Kerala, even last, a week ago, a 21-year-old girl had to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Because of the mistreatment at the police station and the house.
Yes,
and that is also
that.
mobbing, that is also dowry related. And in Kerala, the killing, somebody has used a cobra to kill his own wife.
Yeah.
So even in relatively quote unquote well off Kerala, and many of these things happen in Kerala among middle class and well off sections. It's not the poor.
Exactly. Dowry is very much amongst the middle class. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there is a very clear, in fact, I have shared the data somewhere. There's a very correlation in 2021, first 6 months, or actually 5 months. The data shows that violence against women have increased substantially, and dowry harassment cases increased substantially, and domestic violence also has increased substantially. So the point you made has clear evidence in Kerala. In the 2021 data very clearly, interim report very clearly shows. If you want the data, I can send it to you. Yeah. Probably when you write. So we would now. I hope there is no more question because we need to get into the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
Professor.
Thank you.
Dewan, that for that very, very comprehensive, enlightening, and particularly the perspective and data on this. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now we will have Professor Jose Sebastian, who is very well known in Kerala, particularly talking on the public finance and debt management, etc., etc. And Professor Jose is specialized in public finance. He has written many books and articles. He served as a professor at GIFT, so in Trivandrum. So Professor Jose Sebastian. Jose, are you there? Hello.
He's muted.
Jose.
Unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
No, we can hear you. We can hear you. Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Welcome,
Jose. Thank you very much, Jose, for being here.
Yeah, giving me this opportunity. In between, I would like to tell you that apart from public finance, I have a tradition of working with small-scale entrepreneurs because I work in Entrepreneurship Development Institute of India, and I am also running a small NGO, for the benefit of small and micro entrepreneurs. It's a very, very small venture, a one-man show, in fact. Now, coming to the topic of the day, the impact of COVID-19 on micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises. We all know that they account for 95% of the industrial units in India and 50% of the exports. Next to agriculture, MSMEs are the major employment providers. In the pandemic, thousands of units, all the units were closed, and we do not have many studies on the impact of COVID-19 on the MSME sector. I have come across only 2 studies, one undertaken by Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Study Research in Mumbai, and another one undertaken by ILM. So it will be nice, before going into the findings of these studies, I would like to give you a picture about the, the predicament of the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Here, we can leave the medium enterprises. They are slightly bigger units with better financial resources. Let us concentrate on the micro and small enterprises. These are a vast majority of micro and small enterprises are self-employment benches. You have a guy who would take raw materials, for some kind of processing, and he will return it to the, supplier or the buyer. Some kind of processing using second-hand machinery, maybe employing 1 to 5 workers. This is the situation. And all of them have a severe working capital problem because getting payments is a big problem for them because they're catering to some medium or large units. Very often these large units delay the payment, and the Reserve Bank of India and Government of India has taken several measures to expedite the payments, but it has not helped much. Now, in the pandemic situation, all on a sudden, these units have closed for months together. And what is the situation? What is the present situation? We do not have many studies. The study undertaken by ILO, it relates to 3 states. They have selected 3 states, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and Uttar Pradesh. And it is a study involving 1,525 enterprises. So that is quite a big sample considering the limitations and also the pandemic situation. The study was undertaken during October 2020, that is immediately after removal of the lockdown. So the study has found that 14% of the units are still closed. They have not started production, and it varies between states. In the case of Maharashtra, it is 19%, whereas in the case of UP, it is only 16%. 14% of the units are closed, they have been opened, and about the units which are now opened, 63% of them are facing some kind of lockdown problem. Working capital will be the biggest problem. Then, they have supply chain problems, getting raw materials, workers back from the villages, then, repairing the machinery, equipment, everything, because for the 6-7 months together, the machines were not operating, and there is a lot of, repairs, updating required. 75% of the units reported a reduction in their turnover. 75% of the units which started working, they reported a reduction in turnover. And 45% of the, survival strategy. In the case of 45% of the units which opened, how they survived during the pandemic, just by layoff. The workers were retrenched. Many of them were sent back without wages, without allowances and all. And after the opening up, after the removal of the lockdown, there is 25% reduction in employment. This is the situation. Now, coming to their requirements, as units, all of them require working capital support, because the main problem for small and micro units is working capital. So 75% of the units survived. The enterprises selected for this study reported that they would require interest-free working capital. Interest-free, of course, the government of India gave a moratorium for 3 months. There was some reduction in interest rate, but then that will not help, because many of these units are supplying to larger units. Unless they become operational, unless they become financially viable, they may not place orders with the small scale units. So opening and closing, the difference is very narrow. Even if you open, you may not remain in business for many days. Perhaps you may have to close again. You may have to search for orders. And everything depends upon the overall economic performance. Why the small units cannot open and start the business? Because the demand for their products are also affected. If their finished products are going to the consumers directly, then unless the purchasing power of ordinary people increase, the small guy cannot survive because there is no demand for them. So, it may appear very simplistic, just by offering interest-free loan or some kind of support. Even then, why units are not coming up or demanding loans? And of the 60% of the units survived, reported that they did not know about the packages offered by Government of India. And those who knew about it, those who heard about it, they did not really believed in the government support. They just believed that we are not going to get it. I am not going to get it. This is the attitude. So many of them did not approach. Here also, we have to analyze the approach of our banking sector. Already, the banking sector is flooded with non-performing assets. They will be extremely risk averse. They wouldn't want to give loans to, collateral-free loans to small guys for two reasons. One is the transaction costs. Compared to the large guys or medium guys, the transaction cost of dealing with the small guys is very high. The likelihood of they becoming sick, non-performing assets, that is also very high. So our experience all along has shown that the banks generally avoid the small guys as far as possible. Then they will have to go for the money lenders. And we all know the exorbitant rate of interest. In Kerala, in some places, the rate of interest is measured in hours. We call it meter interest rates. That is the way. Hourly interest rate. Per day interest rate is for 100 rupees, it is 5 rupees. Like that it goes. So all this shows that unless there is a very liberal, support mechanism for the micro and small units, they will not survive. They cannot open. And a large part of it depends on government policy. The Government of India announced 3 lakh crore collateral-free loan. But the ILO study has shown that the takers have been, very less, partly because of information gap and partly because of the reluctance of people to, go to banks and, undergo the, very, time-consuming process of getting a loan. Now, regarding the impact of pandemic on the workers, the number of enterprises engaging no workers increased from 5% to 17%. Prior to the pandemic, there were only 5% units employing no workers. That means single man, self-employed units. Now it has increased to 17%. That means many of the units, those units which have opened up, the owner manager is managing it. He is not employing workers, presumably because of supply chain problems, financial problems, working capital problems, and all. And only 15% of enterprises access to loans. Only 15% of the enterprises which opened access to loans. And loan repayment has been the single most important problem of 80% of the enterprises surveyed. In the case of small enterprises, it is 80%. In the case of micro and medium enterprises, it is 60%. loan repayment. Now, what are the options before the government? Now, there is no point in talking about the findings of a study. What are the options? First and foremost option, I think, is increasing the demand in the economy. For that matter, for this purpose, the government has to introduce some kind of cash transfers. In Malayalam Manorama, I wrote a small piece arguing that to revive the trade sector in Kerala, government of Kerala should, initiate a cash transfer program wherein 27,500 rupees will be transferred to 25 lakh families. My idea is giving 10,000 rupees in the first month, 5,000 each in the second and third month, and 2,500 each for the next 3 months. Can you do it? It will cost 6,875,000 crores. But Kerala government cannot do it because, government of Kerala is heavily indebted and it is, running from pillar to post to pay the salary and pension. But in the case of many other Indian states where micro, small and medium enterprises survive, the financial situation of state governments may not be as tight as that of Kerala. In such states, I think liberal working capital loans without any collateral should be advanced to micro and small units at least. If it is 1 lakh rupee or 50,000 rupee, whatever it be, it should be collateral free and it should be given with a certain conditionalities that it should be used for purchase of raw materials or machinery or whatever it be. And secondly, there should be some kind of solution for delayed payments. Reserve Bank of India introduced a scheme called Trade Receivables Discounting System, wherein if there is a confirmed order and supply has been done, the buyer will, the Reserve Bank of India scheme will give the money to the small guy, and it is a kind of discounting system. So I think this is a time where the banks come forward with such a system, discounting the payments to be received by small guys. That will ease the payments. Then, some kind of assured purchase from government also should be there. For example, a micro enterprise launched by a first generation entrepreneur, he will have a lot of problems. In that case, why not government give him an assured purchase? A certain quantity will be purchased by the government. Such assurances should be there. Then there is also need for hand-holding by successful entrepreneurs. Many first generation entrepreneurs will have problem in coping with this situation. So they need advice. They need hand-holding. If some kind of advisory mechanism can be designed by Government of India or industries department of state governments to train, to give advice to first generation entrepreneurs, or entrepreneurs from the disadvantaged sections, I think the situation may improve. Then also, there is ultimately the solution is raising the demand in the economy. As I told earlier, we need to go in for a large scale cash transfer mechanism, which will raise the demands, purchasing power of the ordinary people, which in turn will lead to more demand for products of the micro and small scale entrepreneurs. And this cycle if continued for 2-3 months, it will ultimately result in the revival of many of micro and small scale entrepreneurs. Here also, there is vast interstate difference. In areas like Tirupur, the ILO study has reported that things are better. Where the enterprises have some kind of online supply chain mechanism, or in the case of accessing raw materials, their survival rate is better. On the other hand, enterprises which are fully dependent on large units, the kind of subcontracting arrangement they have, they are in real problem, because they are waiting for the very survival of their buyers, the large units, because some of the large units are facing serious problems. So in the whole mess of problems, I think Government of India and Reserve Bank of India and banks are not able to take concrete policy decisions. This is also partly because of lack of data. Reliable data is not flowing from enterprises. They are not uploading, or it is not being collected by the industrial department. So in the coming 3-4 months, I think if Government of India can intervene and make available liberal credits, maybe interest-free loan for 1 year without any collateral security, it can have a very significant impact on the micro, small and medium scale enterprises. And we will have further discussions on the basis of the questions raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jose Sebastian, for that very, very important presentation on the impact on the micro and small enterprises. As we know, most of the people in the lower end of the economy, but many of them run one-person shops, self-employed, small enterprises, micro enterprises, and this has also a direct connections with the livelihood of the people. Actually, it affects a lot of families and people in terms of employment as well. So now the floor is opened for questions and comments, etc. So is there any successful survival stories of Kudumbasri in Kerala? So that's also one of the things which is basically a government owned NGO, Gongo, Kudumbasri.
Yeah, Kudumbasri.
Surprise, supported. But let's see, I would like to listen to Professor Jose.
As JS has rightly pointed out, Kudumbasri is not a competitive kind of ventures. They are all highly subsidized ventures, wherein government has put in a lot of money, and Kudumbasri will survive because of this subsidies. On the other hand, at several instances, the Kudumbasris do a lot of harm to small entrepreneurs who survive by competing in the market. While Kudumbasri is receiving liberal subsidies, the small guys, micro enterprises, may not be getting that. So Kudumbasri, with the government support and also through the hard work of women, one cannot discount it. There is a lot of hard work, perseverance on the part of disadvantaged sections, women, hailing from such a section. So Kudumbasri units have a higher survival rate than micro enterprises run by small guys, small people. In the case of hotels, for example, now the government has opened the Janakiya hotels. In all these hotels, the Kudumbashree is supplying the food items. So, in one way or the other,
for 20 rupees.
Better survival chance.
So that's right. You know, when you give food for 20 rupees, it's based on a subsidy. And they give the subsidy, but also the, small one-person coffee shops and hotels cannot survive there because the cost of production of ordinary this thing is 35 rupees if they want to have employment also. When you give for 20 rupees, and that is because there is a subsidy of the grains from the ration shops, and they get per meal another subsidy of 10 rupees labor subsidy. So as a result, it will be very difficult for others to start in the, they will run. So that is why I'm saying that it is a government organized NGO, GONGO, rather than it's a micro and medium level enterprises.
Yeah, or one may have to compare the number of Kudumbashree units surviving and the number of hotels, small hotels getting closed. That will be, give a, real picture about the, employment creation.
So there is a question on Kerala economy.
Yeah. Can you repeat that question?
What is the situation of Kerala's economy, which is heavily reliant on tourism in comparison to neighboring states such as Tamil Nadu and Karnataka?
I think Kerala's economy is facing the worst crisis. Now, it is partly because of the inept fiscal management by the states. As we all know, in order to get elected, for the second time, governments introduced liberal pay packages to the government employees, and in the process, huge commitments have been taken by the government. Around 5,000 crores have been set apart for revised pay and pension. A friend of mine who is a retired college professor, he told before the pay revision, his pension was only 66,000. Now it has gone to 77,000. My own sister, who retired as a school teacher, told me she has a raise of 6,000 rupees. So the middle class and the rich, they are getting the benefits of exchequer. The poor people, as I suggested, there should be some kind of revival package, at least for 25 lakh families. That is not happening. Government is not able to do anything. The package announced by government of Kerala is very, very inadequate. Some interest waiver scheme. Then for small shop owners, there is a waiver of rent for the months of lockdown and all. These are very insufficient. There is a very serious demand problem, aggregate demand problem in Kerala. People do not have purchasing power. And because of this, there is no point in opening the shops. 20,000 hotels have been closed, small hotels. And everywhere, the small businesses are, have closed, or they open 1 or 2 days. They find that there is no takers for their products. And there is another serious problem. The merchandise in the small shops, they are all now, they are not saleable. For the last 7 months, they have been collecting dust and you cannot sell it. So new merchandise, you need new stock for which you need to infuse lot of working capital. So, in my view, Kerala is facing a very serious problem in the agricultural sector. The farmers are facing problems from the wild animals on the one hand, the problem arising from intermittent rains, flooding, earthquake and all these problems are affecting the farmers. Their confidence is almost lost. And I don't think the tourism sector is going to revive in the next 2 years. So, unfortunately, government of Kerala is thinking about care, which is going to cost 1 lakh crore rupees. The state government is in a lockdown of ideas. It doesn't have ideas to revive the Kerala economy.
And that too, 17 lakhs people are returning from the Gulf.
Yes,
So the remittance was the engine of Kerala economy. And the remittance are slowly but steadily getting reduced for various reasons. And that also is, influencing the construction and everything. So that actually, Kerala economy has come from around almost 1 million. It was,
see, now, as a solution to all these problems, our chief minister has offered, interest-less, lower interest loans to entrepreneurs. Some 5% interest rate or something is going to be charged for loans to small and medium scale enterprises. The central problem is that there is no lack of demand. If there is lack of demand, there is lack of confidence. Business confidence is at the lowest level. Then why should one take a risk? Our policymakers are simply not understanding the situation. So why there are no takers for, many government-sponsored, interest-free or lower interest rate scheme loans? There are no takers. So in order to make people, take loan, government has to instill some confidence. That confidence comes from either assured purchase. Government will purchase a certain percentage of their produce, or there should be some assurance that there will not be any repayment problem for the next 2-3 years. So if government can give such liberal incentives, then perhaps people may come forward and start businesses. Now, as John pointed out, 17,000, 17 lakh people have retained, and many of them have skills which can be transformed into products and services. In the Gulf area, these people are working in sophisticated machines, sophisticated environment. Perhaps with some technical support, many of such people can start their own enterprises. But demand is the central issue.
Any other questions, friends? Any other questions or comments? We have a few more minutes.
Can you repeat the question?
How does the continued disaster from 200 and pandemic and further is affecting the economy, especially small-scale enterprise?
Yeah, this is seriously affecting the small and medium-scale enterprises. But Kerala does have solutions for it. If the government can pump in money, either in the form of some kind of cash transfer or some kind of income support, maybe for 6-7 months. Demand will pick up because Kerala is a state where almost 80% of the manufactured products are coming from outside. So it shows that there is demand for products in Kerala. So many of the items which the state is importing, we can manufacture it here. Our entrepreneurs are capable of doing that. So they need some kind of assurances. One way out is maybe government can give an offer to entrepreneurs that 25% of the salary of government employees will be spent on products manufactured inside there or services, given inside there. So such kind of, very out of the box ideas may have to be tried now. Because now also all products, almost 80% of the manufactured products are coming from outside. Why not manufacture the items which are imported into Kerala? There are disadvantages. Our entrepreneurs cannot compete with the entrepreneurs in other states, partly because of the raw material supply, the distance problem is there. Then there is also the problem of, land, value of land is very, very high in Kerala. Electricity charges are high. So there are factors which are affecting their cost structure. Here, the government has to give a subsidy and make them, competitive. The local entrepreneurs are able to compete with the outside entrepreneurs. Perhaps we may have to give price preference. The best way is assured purchase from government. So those kind of strategies may have to be adopted by government. Anyhow, public support is very much required for the revival of Kerala economy.
Hello, and
Reasons
why, is there any question?
Yeah, one question is there. Can you read it down?
Reasons why Kerala took longer to get out of the COVID situation, please.
I think the prime reason is Kerala's industrial background.
Topic. Because reasons for getting it's not an economic problem. So please, you can ask that question. Or, let me see who asked the questions, because that is something which is, beyond the scope of this particular. Who is John? Reasons for why Kerala took longer to get out of the COVID situation, please. That is, there are lots of reasons for that, but I don't think that it is connected with the topic of this discussion. I mean, we can discuss, we can have a Kerala specific session, but this is not only on Kerala, as you know that, so, this is on what you call national situation, and Jose has given his perspective on Kerala also, micro and small scale. There are a number of reasons, I myself will have an opinion on that, but probably that is beyond the scope of this discussions. We will discuss this probably when it comes to our session on public health. So there will be lots of public health experts from Kerala as well as outside Kerala. So it will be much easier. Any other question? Because it's we have crossed the time limit. So I would like to express sincere thanks to Professor Ritu Dewan and Professor Jose Sebastian for those very well-researched perspectives and presentation. Thank you very much. And this is being recorded. We hope that Professor Jose, you also will be able to contribute to our publications, our report. I'm sure those of you are looking at the data set, etc. In our report on the impact of the COVID on economy, livelihood, and public health. That report would be able to give you all the existing data and other stuff. So thank you very much. So I wanted to finish because already 3 minutes late for this presentation. And also I request you, tomorrow we'll have a very, very interesting session. I request each of you to participate. Professor Praveen Jha, who is a professor of economics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, will be speaking tomorrow, particularly on the labor situation. And then Dr. Malini Chakravarti from Center for Budget and Governance Accountability. And we also will have a colleague from the Center for Budget Analysis in Bangalore. So tomorrow, definitely it is much more on public finance and one on labor. And I'm sure tomorrow also, if Jose Sebastian come, he's a scholar on enterprises. And of course, I forgot to say he worked in Ahmedabad in the Institute of Enterprises before. So he has done research on both enterprises as well as public finance. So tomorrow we'll have a lot of, from CBGA perspective, CBGA has done a study on public finance in the times of COVID. So we request you to please participate. Tomorrow also we'll have 3 or 4 speakers, tomorrow from 4 to 5:30. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thanks all the participants who, we had around 47 participants. So thank you very much for all of you, the academics, as well as all other colleagues and friends who participated in this meeting. Thank you.